very excited about this webinar and appreciate that you guys are here to learn more about it. So, as you know, in August of 24, the FAA planning branch released guidance for forecast reviews and approval instructions. This memo replaced and canceled the review and approval for forecasts from June of 08 and canceled the forecast review and approval during the COVID-19 public health emergency of October of 22. So this new guidance is designed to help streamline our forecast approval process and keep projects moving. However, some of the nuances within the guidance can impact towered airports, small general aviation facilities, and in some cases, you can expect your forecast to go to headquarters for review. So what does this mean for us as consultants and airport operators? Now, Kent Duffy and Michael Lawrence have been great. They've been speaking at several conferences and recently offered some clarification to this guidance. So today I thought let's bring together two industry experts and discuss how we can navigate the FAA's new guidelines to help prepare, submit, and obtain approval for our clients' aviation forecasts. So let's bring in these experts. So I'm honored to introduce my colleague Jorge Gonzalez, a senior principal forecast consultant at RS&H, one of the industry's leading authorities in aviation demand forecasting and airport planning, finance, and economics. For those who haven't worked with Jorge, his 3-decade track record speaks for itself. He has developed and validated forecast models for airports at every size and complexity. His analytical approach of demand forecasting has proven particularly valuable in helping airports secure funding and developing capital programs that align with actual market conditions. As we dive into today's discussion regarding aviation activity forecasting, I can't think of anyone more qualified to lead the conversation than Jorge. So please welcome Jorge Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. I'd also like to introduce another incredible colleague of mine, Esteban Alfonso, a principal consultant at RS&H with 25 years of specialized experience in aviation, financial planning, analysis, and demand forecasting. Esteban's expertise spans the critical areas of air service development, demand forecasting, and rates and charges modeling. His ability to translate complex financial analysis into actionable strategies sets him apart. What makes Esteban's perspective especially valuable is how he integrates forecasting with the broader financial planning. He understands that actual demand projections aren't just academic exercises, but the foundation for airline agreements, bond assurances, and long-term capital planning. This comprehensive approach has made him a trusted advisor to airports and airport authorities nationwide. So please welcome Esteban Alfonso.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. Well, now that we're all here, I once again want to say thank you to, it looks like 49 active webinar participants at this point, and say thank you again for joining RS&H's technical speaking series. And today we're going to discuss the navigating the FAA's forecast and review approval process. But before we get into it, I want to set the stage of how this is going to work. So I want you all to pretend that you're just finished lunch at your favorite cafe. And before we all go back to work for the day, let's order another cup of coffee and begin chatting about this FAA memorandum and how airports and consultants might best navigate this new guidance. So I want you all to sit back, sip your coffee, and listen to this discussion. When you have questions, put them into the Q&A, and I'll slip them into the conversation or try to address them at the end. All right? You all ready to get started? Excellent. Let's start the conversation off with a simple question. Esteban, can you explain the key changes in the FAA's new guidance and the implications for airports?
Sounds good, Mike. Thank you. Thank you for the question. And as you said, I'm fully prepared here with my favorite mug and my favorite coffee brew. So absolutely. Why don't we talk a little bit of forecasting now? Hi, and welcome everybody to the webinar again. I'm Esteban Alfonso. Yeah, Mike, there are a number of key changes to the new FAA guidance on forecast approvals. Let me just say that this memo, as you mentioned in your introduction, this memo actually replaces the guidance of reviewing and approving aviation forecasts The first one that I think came out around 2001, Jorge may have to correct me if I'm wrong on that. And then, as Mike mentioned before, there were updates in 2008. There's one in 2022, right after COVID. So Jorge and I, we really reviewed this memo in detail, and there's quite a number of salient points and changes that I think are going to be worth actually highlighting this afternoon. So, long are the days, when we looked at at the very simple 10%, 10% from the terminal area forecast, very simple throughout the 20-year guidance, that was out, back in the early days of my career. But so with that in mind, the first big point that I'd like to mention, Mike, is the forecast, the time frame for forecast approvals. Okay, so forecasts are now being approved for a 10-year period. Now, most of us know that the planning horizon for master plans is 20 years. And prior approvals, used to span the entire time frame, right? So what's happened now is that with this new guidance, with this new memo, this new guidance, it states that anything beyond 10 years will be accepted for planning purposes only, rather than being approved, right? Okay. So this decision was made because of some observations that the FAA made about the uncertainty of 10+ year forecast periods, right? If you really compare forecasts to the actual performance of a region's GDP, the correlation is actually pretty low. So I think the FAA kind of wired in on this idea of saying, all right, we're just going to approve the first 10 years, but then for the following 20 years, we're just going to accept the actual forecast. So basically the FAA deems that, long-term forecasting, those are best used to assess and project the option for airports to have future development. Now, just a caveat: this rule does not include a forecast for BCAs, that's cost-benefit analysis, or environmental impact analysis via NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. So that was my first point, Mike. I think following up on that first point, baseline scenarios have to differ from the TAF by 10% at year 5, and then 15% from year 6 to year 10. That has not changed. All right, that's exactly the same as it was a year ago. However, please note that again, as I said before, the FAA forecast approval is now limited to a 10-year period. So that means that the FAA will now accept the forecast for planning purposes for years 11 through 20, but to satisfy this 11 to 20 acceptance, it must be within 0.5% of the TAF long-term growth rates for that specific airport. So what does this mean? So what this means is if the TAF growth rate for your airport from, let's say, the year 2025 to the year 2044 is 2%, then the average annual compound growth rate for your forecast for 25 to 44 has to be within 1.5 and 2.5%, right? 0.5% difference below or above the TAF. So again, that's something that's new and that we should all keep in mind. A few other salient points from the guidance. In the past, airports of all sizes could opt to use the TAF as their planning forecast, right? Now things have changed. Only large and medium hub airports can opt to use their TAF for their planning. Now this is because these airports, the medium and large hubs that have higher passenger numbers, they have more stable airline service, right? So again, just keep in mind that if you're a small or non-hub towered airport, this no longer is a valid option for you. A couple other points, the FAA now makes it clear that if you submit a forecast, the TAF comparison that is used has to be from the latest available TAF. And it's funny because about half an hour before this webinar, I had a quick conversation with Jorge where he actually reminded me that the new TAF is already out. So it is February. It is a little over mid-February. So yeah, this is about that same timeline. So a new TAF has come out. So if you have a forecast, it has to conform to the new TAF. So we've seen many examples, right? Post-COVID, where some TAFs changed dramatically. I'm talking 15 to 20% for a small or a non-hub airport. And this happened because as the FAA was getting fresh recovery data, like from airports and from industry, which by the way, recovery is still happening in some places, right? What ended up happening is that the coefficient outputs being computed by the TAF statistical model, was just overstating these recovery patterns. So this was throwing a wrench on long-term forecasting. I mean, Jorge and I have examples of entire forecast approaches that had to be literally wiped out and reworked, right? So I do tend to advise airports to be aware of your timelines. If you're starting a forecast, late in the year, somewhere in October, somewhere in like November, be aware, because in February you're going to get a new TAF, and if you're really working really working that forecast, and if you're on the margins, you may want to you may want to consider other options because your TAF could change, and so just please be aware of that. Another important point: forecasts for medium and large hub airports automatically go to headquarters now. This was not the case a year ago. Those could actually be handled by an ADO, but that is no longer the case. So just keep that just keep that in mind. And finally, to me, the big change, right, is that smaller G airports with less than 90,000 operations and not expecting to exceed 90,000 operations have the option of preparing a detailed forecast. Instead, all you really have to do is just identify the critical aircraft by runway, and you have to state in the forecast chapter, that your airport is not expected to exceed those 90,000 operations in the foreseeable future. So this option is also, as a caveat, it's not applicable for capacity projects or federal contract tower submissions. But yeah, that's a big change. I mean, when I read this memo, with Jorge for the first time, that's we called each other, and that's the first thing that kind of sprang to mind, right? 90,000 operations, really, and no forecast required. So again, that's to me is kind of the biggie. So Mike, these are some of the just off the top of my head, these are 6 or 7 of the major differences that I see that came out of this memo that just came out.
Great.
Anything to add there, Jorge?
Yeah, no, I was gonna, thank you. Great points, Steven. One little caveat, again, the 90,000 operations for GA are for the non-tower airports. So keep that in mind. If your airport is a non-towered airport, GA airport, then you do have the option not to submit a forecast for planning purposes, unless you have there are really 3 exceptions to the rule. The ones that Steven mentioned, the capacity, and actually, if it's a capacity-related project, also if you have to go to a NEPA process where noise will be required, that also would not apply. So other than that, I think Steven did a great job. I mean, well, we could speak here for ages on all of the
A long time.
new details and the new sense of this, but I guess we want to move forward with some more questions.
Let's move to the next one. So with everything that Esteban just explained about the changes and the impacts to the airport, I guess, Jorge, do you want to elaborate a little bit more on how this is going to affect the timing and process of updating the forecast?
Great point. Great question. One thing that is also important is when we talk about headquarters, and Steven mentioned FAA headquarters, there's a specific branch, which is called the Airport Planning Branch. And that's where Ken Duffy and Mike Lawrence, the authors of the guidance, reside. Keep that in mind in case you want to ask questions, or you want to congratulate them or not congratulate them. So just keep that in mind, that when we talk about headquarters, generally we refer to the Airport Planning Branch. In the past, and for all of us that have developed forecast, it was always kind of an interesting predicament when we were asked by our clients, "Jorge, Steven, how long is it going to take for us to get a forecast approved?" And generally we would say, nobody knows. Generally, it could take 2 to 3 months. But even more concerning was when we thought that the forecast needed to go to headquarters. And it was kind of an unwritten rule, is that if the forecast that you developed didn't meet the criteria that Stefan mentioned, that has been in place for years, the 10% within 5 years and the 15% with 15 years. Oh, okay, scary, scary. Oh, panic, panic. That is gonna go to headquarters, and God knows when it's coming back. So generally, when we were developing forecast, that was one of the first checklists that we looked at. Okay, if this is going to headquarters, okay, it could take 3, 4, 5, 6 months. We didn't know. With the new guidance now, the new guidance actually clearly states when forecasts have to go to headquarters, which and they even added a caveat associated with the amount of time that it will take. It will take about 45 days maximum from the moment the FAA receives all data. So keep that in mind. It's not just 45 days. It's from when headquarters receives all of the information they need. So the guidance, and Mike talked a little bit about this, and for all of you that have followed these, the main purpose of the guidelines were to streamline the process, to try to create a process where staff, and again, please remember that the guidelines were developed is for internal use. We as consultants want to make sure we follow them because it will make life easier for everybody. But main reason behind it is there was a lot of new staff coming into the airport district offices, the ADOs, and a lot of them were a little confused looking at different guidebooks, and like Mike and Seven mentioned, there were 3, 4 different publications. Plus, there was always the old planner in the ADO that had his own criteria of how forecasts would be approved and developed. So Mike Hines and his team decided, okay, let's put something that is black and white. Yes, it's not perfect, but it basically consolidates the approval and review process. And the main purpose was to try to provide sponsors, airports, and consultants with a better option or better guidance of how long this was going to take. So that is one of the main reasons this was developed. So the guidance in principle should provide a more meaningful timeline and for us to be able to predict how long it's going to take. Because as you know, forecasts are a critical element in the planning processes. Master plans basically can be slowed down because of forecast has not been approved, NEPA processes, BCAs. So this guidance, I believe in just from conversations that I had with Mike Hines, the main objective of it was to streamline the process, create a more reliable, if you want to call, timeline. Also educate the newer staff that was coming into the ADOs, and also help consultants provide the FAA with more kind of, I don't like to use the word robust, but forecast document, but a document that basically follows those guidelines should help you get your review process and your approval process in a shorter period of time.
That's great. Appreciate that. I think that really answers the question on what we can expect on time frame. You know, Esteban, I'd like to go back to a comment that you had made earlier, and let's talk a little bit more about how the new guidelines are going to impact non-towered, low-activity GA airports, specifically those that have less than 90,000 annual operations.
No, that sounds good, Mike. Yeah. So, Mike, as I mentioned before, smaller GA airports with less than 90,000 operations and not exceeding that 90,000 operations, now have the option of preparing a detailed forecast. That is, I think, the key operating word here, Mike, is an option, right? They can do a full forecast if they deem that that's what's necessary. But it is important to note that the FAA is not mandating that a forecast cannot be performed. Again, the key word is that this is an option. It's optional. Another important point that I see in this section here, for the memo, is the actual title itself, right? Jorge and I read this memo last year, and again, it's the first thing that came to mind. It's called Section 5, Forecasts at Non-Towered Low Activity Airports. That's the title of Section 5. Okay, but what does that mean, right? Does that mean that every airport with less than 90,000 operations, going forward, does not have to conduct a forecast, or at least has the option? And all they have to do literally is just list, the actual curricular aircraft. I mean, as many of you know, there's many airports, including many of our clients, that are under 90,000 operations, but they actually do have commercial passenger service and commercial cargo service, right? So how did that play, right? And we started getting calls, from our clients saying, do we need to do a forecast? Not. I mean, what's going on? What's the deal? So after attending, both Jorge and I, a few FA briefings, by Kent Duffy and Mike Lawrence, after this memo came out, we literally inquired, with the FAA, and I know Jorge talked to Mike Hines, and they did confirm that this is meant for small GA airports. But if your airport has commercial service of any kind, I don't care if you only have one flight, one Cape Air flight, it doesn't matter. You are now required to prepare a full forecast. So after the last briefing we had, with the FAA, they have agreed to actually retitle the section after the question that we posed. Section 5 is going to be forecast of non-towered, low-activity airports with no commercial service, and I think it's going to make it a lot more clear. So I hope that gives you a little bit more context, Mike, on that section.
Absolutely. It really does help. And I think that's what the engagement with the FAA is so valuable, is when they put out
Huge.
guidance, having
Huge.
the conversations to say
Absolutely.
exactly what do you mean and how it's going to impact as we move forward. So excellent. Appreciate that. All right. So Jorge, we've talked a little bit about it so far, but let's dive in a little bit deeper. Like, what are the criteria for using the terminal area forecast, the TAF, for planning, NEPA, or the benefit cost analysis for towered airports?
Oh, great question. Again, the criteria included in the guideline is very clear on this specific point, and Stefan mentioned it a little earlier. Only medium hubs and large hubs are allowed to use the terminal area forecast for their planning forecast. And what does that mean? It primarily is, okay, the airport will not hire us consultants to develop their planning forecast. And this is exclusively, and it's important to think that this is for planning purposes. The medium and large hub airports can use the TAF. But if you're going to be using the TAF, also be aware that you need to use every element associated with the TAF. It's not, okay, I'm just going to be using the passenger because it favors my planning criteria and forget about the operations or the based aircraft. No, the guidance clearly states that because as the FAA develops all of these numbers in their famous model, everything is tied together. The operations and passengers. So it's not, you cannot disassociate the one and okay, I'm going to use TAF for passengers, but then I'm going to use my own. So keep that in mind. If you're going to be using the TAF, I would recommend, and I think the guidance probably mentions it as well, make sure you bring in your headquarters, either Mike Hines or Ken Duffy or Mike Lawrence, into the conversation. Large airports, again, the reason the FAA kind of agreed that the TAF can be used is because forecasts for those airports basically are prepared pretty much the same way we prepare forecasts, using a lot of economic indexes and economic criteria. Funny story today, was talking with Stefan just about 10 minutes ago, well, not more than 10 minutes ago now, 45 minutes ago. We're preparing a forecast for a large hub airport. And I was looking at the latest forecast, and as Seven mentioned, it was just published a couple of days ago. And when I looked at my forecast, I call it my forecast because I had just finished developing it and compare it to the 2025 for this large hub, literally it's like I was copying their forecast or they were copying my forecast. I don't know which, but and the reason they probably are so close to each other is we're using pretty much the same modeling processes and predictors associated with economic. So a TAF can be used for medium and large hubs. And again, it can be used for all planning purposes. And if you decide to adopt a TAF, you can also use it for your NEPA requirements and your BCA requirements. Like most of you that do benefit cost analysis know, the guidance allows you to use the TAF or any alternative approved forecast. But in this case, the guidance clearly states that if you want to use the TAF for your NEPA process or your BCA, you can also do that.
So would you recommend that before any airport uses the TAF to just reach out to the FAA and double check that there's any other nuances? What do you think?
Yeah, primarily remember medium and large hubs, not all airport, Mike. There's those two. It's unfortunate, but I think it's good for us consultants that they just narrow it down to those two. If not, Seven and I would be doing a lot more planning work.
All right, well, let's move forward. I mean, kind of staying with you though, Jorge, can you elaborate on the importance of validating the existing and future critical aircraft? How important is that really into the forecasting process?
It's interesting because this was kind of an interesting conversation I had separately with Mike Hines, because this is something that for years, the word critical aircraft, and let's highlight the word critical. How critical was it really in the process, and how was it being approved, and how was it being monitored? Even more important, critical aircraft, as for planners that are on the webinar, that is basically defines a lot of the different standards and associated items that basically are related to that critical aircraft. In the past, yeah, the critical aircraft was established and documented, but very few people actually followed up on it. And yeah, I mean, with aircraft changing, yeah, the Group C aircraft again have a big range and things like that. So the FAA is making it a point, and for all of you airport sponsors, keep in mind that the FAA is going to be looking at critical aircraft a lot closer when you submit your grant applications. They're even considering including in the grant forms that you have actually validated your critical aircraft, and you have validated based on your last 2 months of data associated with the type of aircraft that is flying into the airport. Keep in mind that the FAA also, in the documents that you submit as part of your forecast, they're gonna be looking for the critical aircraft for all of the different facilities associated with the airport. Yes, you have critical aircraft for the runway, you have critical aircraft for cargo, critical aircraft for general aviation, for your terminal area. So keep in mind that when you submit an application for either PFC or a new grant, the FAA will want to make sure that you include a statement that you have validated your critical aircraft. So very important to make sure it's clear in your forecast documentation when you send it to the FAA, but they're going to be looking for that. If not, they'll come back to you and say, hey, please make sure you include all of your critical aircraft as part of the document that you submitted for forecast review and approval.
Excellent. I think that's pretty critical information for everybody to understand. Really focus on the data-driven analysis for your critical aircraft. Let's go in a different direction. So, as we all know, forecasts, airline service, activity at airports never changes. It's always the same, never changes, every day, forever, no big deal. No, that's a joke, right? We know that scenarios change, and we're constantly working with airlines to get better air service. So my question to you, Esteban, is how should airports incorporate the what if scenarios, such as a new air carrier arriving or service stopping. And how, I think maybe even more importantly, how does an airport document this in their forecast?
Right, right. Thanks for the question, Mike. This is this is an area in forecasting that I really like. Doing these alternative scenarios because again, things change, things are going to change. So the, talking to the FAA, they have made it very clear in their guidance that they welcome conceptual or what you may call what if scenarios. Okay. Many times as consultants, we add, the so-called low and high scenario. That was almost something that was almost required years back. Not that much now. That's sort of a longer conversation. But, we would come up with terms like a high GDP or high cargo activity or whatever the name of that, of the alternative forecast may be. So basically what these are, I mean, just to define them, okay? These scenarios, what they do is they attempt to quantify, a demand that's forthcoming, but it still doesn't exist. It's still not there, right? So, for example, the speculation of a new air carrier or new ULCC that's going to come and serve all these markets, or maybe it's the opposite. Someone that is in chapter 11 bankruptcy, and there is an actual potential that they may leave, or maybe something a little different. There's a new factory that's going to house thousands of employees, for a certain corporation that's going to be built around the airport, and that and that's going to spur aviation demand. So the FAA welcomes all of these scenarios, and it will not approve a forecast based on a conceptual scenario, but sometimes the ADO can issue a letter that replaces the approval of a baseline scenario to a conceptual scenario. Of course, the airport has to provide a letter, from a governor or from a certain airline, guaranteeing and confirming service or other types of evidence like this. It's not normal for the FAA or for an ADO to do this or to issue any kind of an amendment. But if you ask me, I mean, my personal view on this, right, is I normally, I love to develop design day schedules, using a peak month, average day, and I love using the appendix. I mean, appendixes are very powerful tools, right? Where we can throw a lot of data, a lot of information. The FAA, they understand what we're putting in these actual appendices, right? But I love doing this because I like giving airports, not only the top-down view, not only as Jorge was mentioning, the regression view or the trend line view. I like to give them a bottom-up, three-dimensional view of what their facility is going to look like on a three-dimensional level, right? When this airplane's going to come in, when it's going to come out. So again, I do encourage airports to show, other methodologies, including, for example, the use of, for example, leakage analysis, right? The second home ownership, that's a big one right now, which has become super populous because ULCCs fly point to point, right? They fly from Dayton, Ohio, to Tampa, Florida, right? So there is, because the ULCCs have this different, this different structure. It's a non-hub structure. Hub modeling or QSI modeling for air service has become a little bit more limited. So yeah, do use the appendices. Do a high or a low. Based on other types of data. Again, the FAA is not going to approve it based. It's only going to approve the baseline, right? But it's something that I always tell airports and other other consultants. Do lean on these alternative scenarios. The FAA does welcome them. They've made it clear. At least they made it clear to me that the more data that they have, even though they're only analyzing a baseline, gives them a better picture of a market. Again, even if only approving that baseline. So that's my 2 cents on that, Mike.
It's a pretty good
If I
2
may,
cents.
let me add a little bit on this one. And we all say, you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. So the benefit of including what if scenarios or alternative scenarios in your forecast report is very useful for several reasons. And Stephen highlighted a couple of them, but even more, and this is why Stephen and I enjoy so much the what if scenarios, is in our meetings with airport directors and mayors, they always have something that they think is going to happen at the airport. A lot of times is political dreams, let's put it that way. Or sometimes actually they are things that are happening behind the scenes that they probably still cannot reveal because there's some confidentiality agreements and stuff like that. But it's really important for you when we're talking with your airport director or the director of planning to ask those questions. Is there anything that is happening that probably will change the base case forecast that we are developing for you? And if there's some sense of reality in those things, it's important for it to be included in your forecast report. And the reason for it and why FAA encourages that, like Stephen mentioned, they're going to approve as your baseline, right? They're not going to approve your alternative concept or even a constrained concept type of scenario. But if you include it in there and actually it happens, I mean, that flight from Avelo that somebody had mentioned actually happens, and your traffic for some reason doubles. It's a small commercial airport that has one operation a day, and suddenly Avelo decides to move in. The fact that you're including it in the report actually will help you go back to the FAA and tell them, hey, by the way, that reality and that concept scenario that we included in the report has happened. So let's talk again and let's see if you can go ahead and move forward and approve the forecast now based on that new thing that happened. In the past, I mean, for those of you that have done forecasting, the FAA wanted you to do a high and a low scenario. And again, a lot of us was just, okay, we'll just change a couple of the economic indexes and create it. Trying to create some meaning to it. But this conceptual and alternative forecast scenarios will allow you to proactively in the future go back to the FAA and get your forecast revised and approved based on data that is already in front of them. So keep that in mind. Don't walk away or not really look at that. I think take that option, take that opportunity to include it in your reports. And like I said, every airport has one of those potential options, either positive or negative, but generally they want to see that in the report.
Excellent discussion on that. I think there was some real good clarity on what airports can do. So let's see that we're about 15 minutes from the top of the hour, and want to make sure we get some time in for some Q&A. So Jorge, I'm going to come to you with one more question, and then we'll transition to some Q&A. So thinking about this, getting ready to do a forecast, like how can airports be prepared, prepare their records, and to kind of improve that planning process to better align with this new FAA guidance?
Well, that's a great question. I love that question. Well, the fact that we now have a guideline, and I like to call it kind of an ingredients cookbook for preparing forecast. So the closer you align your documents that you're submitting, and primarily your forecast reports or your supporting documentation to your forecast report, the better you align them with the guideline, the quicker and the easier the approval and review process is going to be. Why? Because the guideline was prepared specifically to help FAA staff at the airport district office at the ADO level and at headquarters to make sure that forecasts are being reviewed following those key points. So, I mean, here at RS&H, Steven and I have prepared a checklist that we use internally with our staff, our younger staff, to make sure that as forecasts are being prepared, we pretty much check every box associated with the guidelines. Out there are several that we probably will share with you later, but one of the things that is really important is basically make sure that you check the requirements included in the guidebook. If you do that, I can assure you that the review process and the approval process is going to be streamlined. The review process will be shorter. You will have less back and forth between the FAA and yourself. So simple answer, follow the guidebook, follow the ingredients, make sure your forecast cookout includes everything that is shown in that guidebook. So I think that is probably the best advice I can give you today is that follow the guidebook. Yeah, one thing that probably I want to also expand on something that Steven mentioned is this guidebook is still, or these guidelines are still a work in progress. FAA went through a pretty rigorous process in trying to develop something for internal use. Mike Lawrence and Ken Duffy traveled the nation before it was published, talking to different ADOs and young and old staff to try to make sure it was aligned with things that they thought was needed, and they received a lot of input from within the FAA. At the same time, they've been pretty open and also asking for input and comments from the consultant community and from sponsors. So if you see something in the guidelines or in the guidebook that is confusing or doesn't really make sense to you or creates a little bit of a lot of questions for you, like Steven mentioned, when we looked at this, the first question we said, okay, so non-towered airports with less than 90,000 operations don't need forecast. Wow, that created a lot of concern and happiness for us at the same time. But as we reviewed it and as we talked a lot more with the FAA, and we realized that there's still a lot of little adjustments that this guidelines will be made. Yeah, so it's still a work in progress, and the more feedback the FAA receives from us, that is helpful to streamline this process and really meet the main purpose of why this was developed, is to make our life and the life of the FAA easier, the best for everybody. So,
Jorge, let me second that. I mean that's such an important point that, again, just want to remind everybody, every consultant, every airport, that this is a technical memorandum. It's still in that format. It is changes and amendments not only are encouraged to happen, but will happen. There's a lot of gray areas, and I know that the first time all of you read this memo, you were confused in some sections, not others. But just to let you know, we were confused as well. So it's not just you guys. It's and this was actually prepared for the FAA as an internal memo, to train their ADO. So don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to contact us, the FAA, or whoever you want for any type of clarification or confusion that you have that could potentially be amended in a final guidebook that I assume will probably come out in the next few years. Mike?
Absolutely. Well, my coffee cup is almost empty, so I think we're getting
Mine
close
too.
to the end. So people are probably saying, "Oh, I got to get back to work now." So let's answer a couple of questions that have come in, and then we'll save a few minutes close to the top of the hour to just kind of close it. So, first one I see here, you guys can decide who wants to start off on the answer, but on page 9 of the 2024 tech memo, it says consistency checks for non-towered airports. Are we comparing master plan forecast KGARs to FAA aerospace CAGRs, or are we comparing the master plan forecast levels, kind of the numbers, to the forecast that is derived from the master plan base year? And is the FAA aerospace forecast CAGRs, are we comparing operations to flown hours? So there's a lot in there.
Right, right. So Mike, let me take that one first,
Okay.
and I think Jorge will probably have some additional comments. But as we understand the guidance, this guidance is asking the comparison of your forecast, of the forecast of your airport, to comparing it to the growth rates that can be found in the FAA's aerospace forecast. Again, that's published every year. I believe it's in May. Jorge, I'm not sure, May or June, so something along those lines. So it's asking for you to take the baseline number from your forecast and then applying the growth rates that the FAA has in the aerospace forecast, and then compare that to your forecast. Again, to see that that difference, of the 5 and 10% that we were talking about earlier. And as with all other forecasts, these are done as consistency checks. They're mainly done for passengers, operations, and based aircraft. And just to even give you a bit more insight, I think if you look at the aerospace forecasts, I believe the growth rates, table 8, I believe it's table A3. There's general aviation tables. I believe that's table 29 and 30 are the general aviation tables. I look at these forecasts all the time. So those are the growth rates that you've got to go into, apply to your base year, and then again compared to your forecast. So Jorge, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, apparently that criteria that is included in page 9 of the guideline is associated with non-towered airports. Forecast if you're preparing forecast for non-towered airports or new airports, that's what the criteria is associated, because when basically if it's a non-towered airport, again, you have to prepare because it's over 90,000 operations. Just keep that in mind. And if it's new airports, obviously you don't have a lot of history, so everything is new. So what like Steven mentioned, and I'll make it very clear, is let's say in your forecast, your base year, if you have 100,000 operations, what you would do is apply the growth rates in the airspace guidebook or not document, and grow it at those rates. Once you have those numbers for passengers, operations, and basic aircraft, then you would compare them to your forecast, and then decide if it's within the 10 or 15%. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, I think it does. I think, and if not, reach back out and we'll be happy to elaborate further with you guys. Another one that came in is, are there any formalized requirements to address climate resiliency, vulnerability, asset protection, and et cetera in the forecasting, review, and approval process?
Okay, I'll take that one. That's an easy one. I'll take the easy ones and let Steven answer the tough ones. The guidance per se does not specifically mention anything associated with resilience or vulnerability or anything like that. But at the same time, if any of those projects will have an impact on capacity or anything associated with critical aircraft, then the guidebook applies. Meaning, yes, basically, if you're basically developing a project that will be impacting capacity because of climate change or something like that, make sure that you basically validate the forecast and review, and either you have to validate them, and if it changes, you will have to get it approved once more. So it's not specific. The words, I mean, those are new fancy words that probably headquarters still doesn't include in some other guidance, but it is important to keep it in mind as we develop projects associated with that.
Great. I see that there's a few more that questions that have kind of popped in as we've been talking, but I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. So what we'll make sure we do is take a look at those and reach back out and give you a response. So I just don't want to keep everybody here past the top of the hour. I know they're probably itching to get back to work. So with that, like Jorge, I think we've got like a little bit of a bonus to share. You want to take us to close and share some key information for folks?
Thank you, Mike, and thank you everybody to staying this long on this topic. Hopefully, it's been very useful to you. One of the things that one of the last topics I spoke about is how do you want to make sure you're following the guidelines? And we internally, like I mentioned, we have developed a very elaborate, very detailed checklist. But as a minimum, if you can keep in mind when either you're reviewing forecasts before sending them to the FAA, or one of your consultants is telling you, okay, we're ready to submit this to the ADO for evaluation. If you can check at least these main 6 points, I think we would be very happy to that you have done it, and I think you would have made a great inroads into getting your forecast properly reviewed and approved. First one is pretty basic. Did you check to see if the forecast have to go to headquarters? And why is that important? Is because that will define how long the review process will take. So if it's going to headquarters, just keep in mind that it can take up to 45 days more than what you would normally expect from a normal review and approval process. I mentioned the importance of critical aircraft being included with your forecast. Make sure that there's a section in the document that talks about critical aircraft. If you're going to be using the forecast for a NEPA process or a benefit cost analysis evaluation, regardless of the airport type, this applies to any airport, even the ones that are non-towered and less than 90,000 operations. Make sure you look and review the long-term forecast, and that they're within the criteria that the FAA published in the guidelines, the famous 0.5% that Steven mentioned. If your forecast basically differ more than the 10 and the 15% at year 10, year 5 and year 10, don't be concerned, don't panic and say, hey, but you need to make sure that is you have consulted with the ADO and basically kind of agreed why the difference. It could be easily because there's a new aircraft that is being a new carrier that is being entering or will enter your traffic or your schedules, or suddenly airline went bankrupt and they're leaving your airport. So keep in mind that if you're not meeting those criteria, don't panic. Just make sure you meet with the ADO and talk it over. Did you include the alternative concept forecast scenarios? Like we said, it's really important, and scenarios that are not only alternative but constrained and things like that can be included. Steven and I elaborated quite a lot about why it's important to include that. And last but not least, if your airport is a non-towered airport and it's a GA airport that has less than 90,000 annual operations, make sure you look into it and see if you really need to develop a planning forecast or not. So with those, again, hopefully these are the 6 points that you can remember from this whole webinar. Thanks a lot.